So can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can, thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to a new subject, and that is advising in respect to the group litigation. Can we begin, please, with poll 00162572? At the bottom of the first page. This is the 6th of August 2015, and it follows, or is just before the Panorama, the 2015 Panorama programme. And it seems as though you're circulating to Melanie Caulfield and Mark Underwood a draft letter to Alan Bates. And you say, "Hi, what do you reckon? Would this work? I must say I'm quite taken with it." And the letter begins, "As you know, a Panorama programme is due to air on Monday in relation to the Post Office and the Horizon system. At the same time, we're writing to applicants in the mediation scheme to urge them to engage with us to arrange a time for mediation to take place. I know the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance is urging applicants not to take part in mediation. That is your right, of course, and you have your reasons for taking this position." Just pausing there, that's a phrase that we see in quite a lot of your emails or press releases or drafts. We see that is your right, of course. Is that an equivalent of you saying you're wrong, we don't agree?
No, it's not saying that at all. It's saying that everyone has their right to take their position as they see fit.
You then continue, "I wanted, however, to write to you to urge you to reconsider the position," and you set out various reasons. And if we scroll up to the top, Mark Underwood responds as follows. He says, "My biggest concern is that this recognises the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance, and since closing of the working group," is it WG, is that working group?
Yeah.
Yep. "We have made a conscious decision to try and avoid recognising them and their power to seemingly orchestrate applicants' decisions. Were you aware of that conscious decision to try and avoid recognising the JFSA?"
I don't really recall.
"Whatever we have sent in the past has been manipulated and been the springboard for conspiracy theories. So at the moment, I would be minded not to send the letter to JFSA, especially as Alan Bates will, as a disengaged applicant, will be receiving his own letter anyway, which covers a lot of the similar points. My other thought is that we did end up sending it. I think sending it to all applicants would be dangerous, as not all will be represented by the JFSA, and it would promote JFSA to them." Can you recall, as at August 2015, a concern about recognising the JFSA and about sending potential applicants their way?
I don't really recall that I'm afraid, I'm sorry.
Moving on, poll 00025509. We're now in June 2016, and this is the terms of reference for the Postmaster Litigation Steering Group. It explains there that the 1.2, the Postmaster Litigation Steering Group is established to coordinate Post Office's approach and response to the claim, and therefore brings together representatives from affected teams in the business, as set out below. Can you recall whose idea the Postmaster Litigation Steering Group was?
I can't recall whose idea it was.
Do you know how often it met?
I think it met... Is it one chaired by General Manager Network?
Could we scroll down?
Yeah, I think it was Tom Moran chaired it. So I think it met maybe... I can't really recall, but I think it probably met weekly or at least fortnightly.
And is this the body through which significant matters in the litigation would be discussed, strategy discussed?
It was certainly the sort of coordinating group, if you like, that would come together to assess what was, you know, the latest developments, etc., etc.
I want to look now specifically at the recusal application. Could we please turn to poll 001577-065? And so this is going on quite a bit in time. We're now on the 17th of March, 2019. Jane McLeod emails Alistair Cameron as follows. She says, Al, I've ready to send to the board the following. Draft paper from me which recommends the recusal application and retaining counsel on the basis I proposed to you yesterday. Lord Newburger's preliminary advice. Advice from Womble Bond Dickinson. And it says, Lord Grabbanner has commented this afternoon, in brackets not to be repeated, treat this as my broad yes, that is okay. I'm still wading through the treacle of this mad judgment. I don't understand what he thought he was doing or what he thought he was supposed to be doing. The constant repetition of the mantra that he wasn't deciding anything outside the scope, outside of the common issues is hardly credible. I've yet to get to the many other matters, but I can see from Gideon's notes and from the various quotes that it just gets worse. And then she says as follows, I've discussed stakeholder and comms issues with both Mark and Patrick. They both acknowledge that this will be difficult to manage and will cause significant noise in more than one quarter. However, they are both supportive of a strategy that delivers the best legal outcome for Post Office. What do you recall of the conversation that you had with Jane McLeod?
Well, my recollection is largely as effectively set out here, in that she updated me on the potential proposal to apply for recusal, and asked me for my view as to how that would, what sort of reaction that might provoke in external communications terms, so in terms of the media or indeed wider stakeholders, MPs, etc., etc.
Can you recall what her personal view was?
I can't recall her personal view, no.
Why do you think it was that the communications director, yourself, would be involved in the decision as to whether to seek the recusal of a judge or not?
I think it's not really a question whether I was involved in the decision. I think it's a question as to whether, as to the business assessing what the potential reaction externally in media terms and MP terms and other stakeholder terms might be as part of a process of reaching a decision, a very clearly very difficult and challenging, finely balanced decision.
Could we turn to poll 000215663, please? There seems to be a board meeting. Was it unusual to have these attendees at this at the board meeting?
Sorry, unusual to have.
We see a number of attendees from Norton Rose. We see
sure.
Jane McLeod attending as well. Do you recall this being a particularly noteworthy meeting at all?
I recall that it was. I think it was effectively a special meeting to consider the recusal question.
If we scroll down, please, we have a summary of the discussion with Lord Grabbanner, and we have Jane McLeod there reporting about the call that had been held, that he had reviewed the common issues judgment and understood how it impacted on the current and prospective trials. He noted that the judge had received several warnings about allowing inadmissible materials, but had chosen to do so, and as such had behaved improperly and was wrong as to the law. It was an unusual case, which was unusual procedurally. If we go over to page 4, please, about halfway down, it says there, Mark Davis's view was sought from a communications and stakeholder perspective. Who did you see as the stakeholders?
Well, it would be I suppose all of the people involved in this issue, from the JFSA through to MPs and peers, others, but obviously the broader media as well. I think it was a general question as to how this decision would effectively land, if you like, in those different quarters. So I gave my view, which I think, notwithstanding, was likely to generate some adverse publicity, but obviously it wasn't a decision that should be taken based on how it would be received in the media or among stakeholders.
Were you often called upon to give a stakeholder perspective.
Yes, it was a part of my job.
Did you count sub-postmasters as stakeholders?
Yes, I mean both in terms of the NFSP, so the representative body, the JFSA, individual sub-postmasters themselves. Obviously there were different groups of postmasters. There was obviously the Crown branches that we owned, or the Post Office owns. There was the large main Post Office branches, there were the local branches, so absolutely, yes.
It might be suggested that the decision to seek the recusal of the judge was quite an aggressive litigation tactic. Can you see how, if the stakeholders were sub-postmasters, it might actually be in their interests not to take such a tactic?
Not to take recusal?
Yes. As in, might it have been in some stakeholders' interests not to have approached the litigation in that way?
Absolutely.
And did you make that clear?
Absolutely.
So you explained to the board on this occasion that they might want to consider the interests of sub-postmasters?
Well, I don't recall the conversation. I really don't. I do remember that it was obviously a very finely balanced decision, and there was no question that such a significant step would have caused a significant amount of media and other interest. And a part of that would be a stakeholder reaction from within the sub-postmaster community that would undoubtedly be concerned at the very least about such a decision.
Protecting the business long term presumably also included protecting the interests of sub-postmasters.
Absolutely.
And was that something that you communicated to the board?
I can't recall the conversation.
If we turn over the page, we can see that after careful consideration of all the arguments, each director present and participating in the decision supported a resolution of the board that an application should be sought for the judge to recuse himself from the case. Could we please look at poll 0035981? We look at the bottom email, please. Can you assist us? Was this an announcement of some sort that you were drafting?
So this looks like we'd been asked to to draft a statement on the decision that the board had reached to recuse, to seek application to recuse.
And you say, we have reflected in great depth on the long and detailed judgment from the first trial. After serious consideration and following advice from external legal counsel not previously engaged on these issues, we have decided to seek leave to appeal the findings. Furthermore, we will today also be making an application for the sitting judge to be recused from the ongoing and upcoming trials. We are acutely aware of the significance of this application, but based on the evidence we have received, we have serious reservations about the judge's ability to remain impartial in ongoing and future Post Office hearings. We do not take this action lightly. However, we passionately and firmly believe that this application is in the best interests of Post Office customers, postmasters and their staff, and the communities who rely on our network and services every single day. We will take urgent steps to address the criticisms made in the judgment about aspects of the Post Office's practices and behaviour, but have confidence in our position and defence of this group litigation. If we scroll up, please. Patrick Bork responds and says, I think this is much better, preserves the tone but much shorter. Two immediate observations. Can we reintroduce the fact that we're making operational changes following the judgment so we can't be accused of burying our head in the sand? And I might be tempted not to use the word passionately, not because I disagree with the sentiment, but because I wonder whether, again, some might say this is an emotional reaction, which just goes to show how incapable we are of being objective and open to the possibility of our being wrong or some such. Can you recall how high up within the organisation this particular press release or statement went?
Well, it wouldn't have been signed off without it going, I imagine, certainly to the executive, to the group executive, and probably to the board as well.
Could we please turn to poll 00269062? You have, by this stage, if we turn over to the second page, I think circulated the draft.
Yeah.
This is the 21st of March, 9:43 a.m. To Jane McLeod, and you say, as the application for recusal will be made this morning and likely to be public by lunchtime, we've prepared the statement below with input from Portland and legal team. How often would you involve Portland Communications?
Well, it would, over the course of the period as I was at the Post Office, it would depend whether they were working for us at that particular time. They were a public affairs communications agency who I think had been brought in to work with us on this particular issue at this particular time. They'd been worked for us previously on different briefs, and as had other public affairs organisations. But obviously on a statement as important as this one, we would absolutely get their view on it.
And you say, I would like to send to the board and BAYS/UKGI for information, and we will also prepare internal and stakeholder communications. And then Jane McLeod responds on the first page. If we scroll up, she says, try this, Al off copy. Can you recall why Alistair Cameron was removed from the copy?
I can't recall, no. I mean, I think, and I recall that Jane and I spoke about obviously needing to have a statement prepared for this announcement, and I'm pretty sure we spoke either that day or the previous day very early in the morning, which was then the basis of the statement that she has then amended here. Mr. Cameron at the time was the interim chief executive, I think, or perhaps, I can't quite recall, but Paula Venables had either left by that point or was away because of family reasons. So Alistair was the acting CEO. So it's possible that she removed him just to ease his inbox while we made final changes before we then went to him with the final proposal.
If we scroll down, she has struck through the following. It says, we will continue to make operational and other improvements, including those raised by the judgment, in the interest of our customers and postmasters. And she's struck through as follows, including those raised by the judgment. The applications we'll be making, or have made, reflect, however, our overall confidence in the legal position relating to our defence of this group litigation. And then she's also struck through below. Were you aware of any concern on her part about the confidence in the legal position?
Not that I recall, no.
I want to move now to the Horizon Issues judgment. Could we please turn to poll 00281725? We're now on the 28th of August 2019. If we could have a look at the bottom email. Melanie Caulfield emails, there's a zip file of documents for the recipients to look at. I'll come back to the top email. I just want to take you to a couple of the underlying documents. Could we please look at poll 00023606? This is one of the attachments. This is number 5. There are, as I say, a large number. Were you involved in the drafting of this?
No.
Who would have been involved in the drafting?
The Melanie led on the drafting. This was preparatory work for a judgment. So obviously at this point we didn't know what the judgment would say, but it was work that we would do as a matter of course, really, to prepare for judgments that would, or judgments, or indeed any kind of event that was about to take place that affected the Post Office. We'd obviously have pre-prepared material.
Were you Melanie Caulfield's manager, supervisor?
I wasn't her direct manager, but she was part of my team, absolutely, yeah.
And it looks as though there is a call script being prepared for you, or it says Mark Davies to be confirmed.
Yeah.
If we go over the page, please. One of the points to make, it says, we should be reassured that the view of both independent expert witnesses who gave evidence in the litigation is that all the indications are that Horizon is robust, comparing well with similar systems across retail and financial service sectors, which have to be highly reliable. There's another attachment. Could we please turn to poll 000236623? In very similar terms, there's a video script. It says delivered by Mark Davies to be confirmed. Were you going to be on camera making a statement, or what is this for?
Well, again, this is preparatory work for the judgment. We didn't know when the judgment would be handed down, so these scripts, pieces of communications were being prepared in anticipation of the judgment being handed down, and of course would be revised and amended subject to, of course, the finding, which of course self-evidently at the time we didn't know what the judgment would be. So I think the delivered by Mark Davies to BC is a possibility that I might have done that video, but it's entirely possible that somebody else might have done it.
The second bullet point says the judgment raises a number of issues and criticisms, but what I want to do straight away is reassure you about what we can have confidence in the overall robustness of Horizon, and that it compares well with systems used by other retail and financial services companies each day. Both independent experts for Post Office and the claimants in the case on opposite sides of the litigation confirmed this. And then if we go back to the email that we were looking at before, that's poll 00281725, we have comments to Melanie Caulfield from Andrew Parsons, the lawyer at Womble Bond Dickinson. And he says it as follows. He says, the one repeating message throughout the documents is that Horizon is robust because both experts say so. This is correct as at today, but if the judge finds that Horizon is not robust, then he will likely have found a reason to sidestep or disavow the expert evidence. In those circumstances, then, I'm not sure this comms message will hold water. It may be worth working up alternative comms package on the basis that the judge throws out the expert's views. Just pausing there, as at the 28th of August 2019, was it unclear within your team that, were you not aware within your team, should I say, that a possibility was that the judge could actually find that Horizon was not robust?
Oh, of course. I mean, it was entirely possible. I mean, Andrew Parsons is right to raise these issues.
Did they come as a surprise to you?
Not at all. I mean, these were proprietary, as I say, these were documents that were being prepared in advance of any announcement. So we had to sort of think through, well, what sorts of materials will we need for that judgment? And so they would be prepared as drafts. But then obviously once the judgment had come in, would be revised extensively to be in line with that judgment, effectively ripped up and started again. So Andrew's point about the one repeating message, if the judge finds that Horizon is not robust, then he will likely find a reason to sidestep or disavow the expert evidence. In those circumstances, I'm not sure this comms message will hold water. He's completely right about that. And Melanie and all of those who were preparing this package would have been similarly aware, but were working based on what they understood at the time.
Was Mr. Parsons quite involved in during the litigation in feeding into these communications messages?
We always sought to make sure that, because communications messages are not just produced by the communications team, they're produced by the communications team and then in collaboration with other teams across the organisation, and Mr. Parsons was part, and external organisations as well, and Mr. Parsons was part of that broader group of people dealing with the litigation. So, you know, he's right to raise the point, but it would have been a point that we would have all said, well, yes, that's right, Andrew, we totally hear what you say, because we're not going to just put out what we want to put out. We're going to see what the judgment says, and of course the judgment would have said something very different. We would have torn up those materials and started again. And
we see also a further comment on the paragraph below as well.
I beg your pardon, sorry.
We see a further piece of advice on the third paragraph on the page as well. I want to move on to issues of non-disclosure in the litigation. Could we please look at poll 00112596? This is an email halfway down from Ben Fote on the 2nd of October 2019. He emails Nick Reed, Alistair Cameron and yourself, and he says a disclosure issue has arisen in respect of the group litigation order Horizon trial for you to be aware. It appears that Post Office failed to disclose potentially relevant documents in those proceedings. You will recall that we are currently awaiting the court's judgment in respect of those proceedings. If we look at the top of the page, you say that you will brief the comms team as discussed. Do you recall this issue?
I absolutely recall the email from Ben, and it was obviously I think there's another email that's been disclosed from Alistair Cameron, which I think captures very...
Let's have a look at that, shall we?
Yeah.
It's POL 00112591. And this is Alistair Cameron's response. He says, Ben, I read this with real distress. It is horrendous. Of course we must tell the court immediately. Now we know. The narrative should be very clear that Fujitsu told us one thing and have now told us something else, and we have at all times told the court what we believe to be true. He says, FIRFJ, that might be for Fujitsu, we have time to make decisions, but this is the third time they've misled us or changed stories, and I think we have to follow that logic. So what is the appropriate response? Do we need to insist that a third party review and test their evidence? Question mark. In your witness statement, you have been very complimentary about Paula Venables, about Angela van der Bogard, about Alice Perkins. I don't believe that there is a mention in complimentary terms about Alistair Cameron. The openness that you have been discussing seems evident in this 2019 email. Why haven't you praised Alistair Cameron in the same way?
There's no particular reason for that. He captures in this email extremely well the sense of distress and anger that there was when we got that email from Ben. I worked closely with Alistair, a huge amount of admiration for him.
I'm going to move on to the topic of remote access now. Could we please begin with POL 00028062? And this is the Deloitte report of the 23rd of May 2014. And it's page 31 I'd like to look at. When did you first become aware of this report?
I don't think I've ever seen this report, but I was aware of Deloitte obviously having done the work, I guess probably around I don't know exactly when, I'd be guessing.
Okay, if we scroll down, we can see some passages from the report. The inquiry's seen these a number of times. I'll speed through them. The first is a method for posting balancing transactions was observed from technical documentation which allows for posting of additional transactions centrally without the requirement for these transactions to be accepted by sub-postmasters. Whilst an audit trail is asserted to be in place over these functions, evidence of testing of these features is not available. Third bullet point says, for balancing transactions, we do not identify controls to routinely monitor all centrally initiated transactions to verify that they are all initiated and actioned through known and governed processes or controls. The final bullet point, controls that would detect when a person with authorized privilege access used such access to send a fake basket into the digital signing process could not be evidence to exist. You say that you were aware of the report in broad terms. Can you recall when you first discussed the report with anybody?
No, I can't recall that.
Were you aware of the significance of the report?
No, I wasn't. I don't think I ever saw this report. And certainly obviously I saw it when it was disclosed to me, but I didn't see it at the time.
Could we please look at POL 00308968? We're going to look at a series of emails discussing the issue of remote access. This one is from Melanie Caulfield to yourself in December 2014. So the same year as that report. She is sending you an email regarding various comms lines. And then if we look at, there's halfway down, there's a section on remote access. She says, I'm working on the dismissal of the remote access conspiracy theory. It is so totally loony and need right words to explain that. Was that a view that was shared within your team, that the remote access issue is a loony conspiracy theory?
They're not the words I would have used.
Did you respond and say it's not a loony conspiracy theory?
I don't think so, no. I mean, I think we, as I understood it, remote access in whatever form had been used in a very limited amount, I think maybe one case. And so in a sense, where we were being told or believed, people believed that the Horizon system didn't work as it should do and that money was being lost through in branches as a result, it didn't seem to make much sense that remote access would be the cause of that. We were unclear who would be seeking remote access to branch data and why they would be moving money around using that. So it seemed unlikely. We were told that there was a basement facility at the Bracknell headquarters of Fujitsu where men in plain clothes were accessing the system and moving money around, and it didn't feel like the kind of organisation that we knew we were part of.
We've seen various emails from yourself talking about conspiracy theories and in very similar terms, the words used there. Was there a culture in your department that made it okay for those who worked under you to refer to these kinds of issues as totally loony?
No, there wasn't.
Can we please look at poll 00162285? It's an email of the 30th of January 2015, very early in the morning, 7:29 in the morning, from Paula Venables regarding the upcoming appearance at the Select Committee. Dear both, your help please in answers and in phrasing those answers in prep for the Select Committee. 1, is it possible to access the system remotely? We're told it is. What is the true answer? I hope it is that we know this is not possible and that we are able to explain why that is. I need to say no, it is not possible, and that we are sure of this because of XXX, and that we know this because we have had the system assured. Do those words stick out for you at all?
They stick out in the sense that Paula was seeking to get absolutely to the bottom of whether or not remote access was possible or not, because she needed to be able to explain exactly what the position was.
It might be suggested that the words there, I need to say no it isn't, was in fact an instruction to look for material that tended to go against remote access.
That's categorically not the case.
Point 2, you've said that this is such a vital system to the Post Office. What testing do you have and how often? When was the last time? So there are 2 separate questions, one on remote access and the second on testing. It says, Leslie, I need the facts on these. I know we've discussed before, but I haven't got the answer front of mind. Too many facts to hold in my head. But this is an important one, and I want to be sure I do have it. And then Mark to phrase the facts into answers, plus a line to take the conversation back up a level, i.e. to one of our narrative boxes / rocks. That's the reference to rocks. Do you recall I took you very early on to an email in which you outlined 3 rocks? It certainly looks like Paula Venables there is referring to the rocks that you developed.
No, not those rocks. Rocks was a phrase that Paula would use from time to time. She obviously, when she was doing a select committee or some other kind of interview, she would often say, what are my 3 rocks? What are the 3 key facts in this particular issue? So it was a phrase she used regularly in all sorts of contexts.
Could we turn to poll 001500992? We're still in the early hours. It's the top email. Leslie Sewell, it's not sent to you, but we'll see in due course what happens. Leslie Sewell says, who are Julie, George and Dave Hulbert?
So as I recall, they were colleagues of Leslie's in the IT team.
And Leslie says, I need some help with both of these. Julie, the first is for you. This really is in the back of the Deloitte review. Now, looking at that now, do you understand that to be a reference to the Deloitte report that we just looked at? And she says, this is fairly urgent as Paula is preparing for Select Committee next week. Was there a conversation between Leslie Sewell and yourself about the Deloitte review at this stage?
I can't recall with any certainty. It's entirely possible, but I can't recall. I had many conversations with Leslie.
Poll 003865587. So we're moving from 7:35 to 8:11 in the morning. Lots of activity first thing. Thank you. If we look at the top email, thank you. So from Melanie Caulfield to yourself and to Jane Hill, she says, thanks, Mark. We're already well covered on one. It's in the existing brief. Remote access is possible, but we have a strong line on conditions for that. Do you recall that the initial response from your team, Melanie Caulfield in your team, was that remote access is possible?
In certain circumstances, yes, yeah.
Poll 001622287. $8:29 in the morning. Halfway down. Thank you. We have Leslie Sewell emailing you and saying, I've got my guys pulling something together, then we should catch up. You see, that's why I asked about the Deloitte report, because Leslie Sewell has, straight after receiving the email from Paula Venables, referred to it being in the Deloitte report. And then it seems as though there's a proposed catch-up. Do you recall whether there was or wasn't a catch-up around that time?
I don't recall, I'm sorry.
And then if we scroll up to the top, we have an email from yourself saying, hi, Tar. There are lines already which Mel can send you, then we should review. So again, suggestive that there was some sort of collaboration.
Yeah.
I don't mean that in a negative way, but between yourself and Leslie Sewell.
No, I mean, it would be a case of the lines that Mel had referred to in the previous email, which we already had on this issue, making sure that those lines were still correct, based on what Leslie and her team would the work that they would do.
If there were something significant that we've just seen in the Deloitte report, would you have expected Leslie Sewell to have brought it to your attention?
Yes.
And can you recall having any conversation about it?
I beg your pardon?
Can you recall having any conversation?
I can't recall the conversation with Leslie on this subject. I mean, I'm sure I had many conversations with her on this subject, but I don't recall a specific one on that day.
Could we please look at poll 000315538, page 3. It's an email from Dave King at the bottom, the Senior Technical Security Assurance Manager. Do you recall Mr. King?
No.
He says, Julie, I've answered as best I can, but I understand Kevin Lenehan is also getting the information from Fujitsu. I do know these have been answered for the lawyers and Deloitte when they were looking at this. So again, another reference to Deloitte there. It says the system has remote access only for Fujitsu support personnel through a support gateway against which all activity is monitored. all transactions are written to an immutable audit trail at the point of completion, and it is from this store that any evidential information is obtained. So that looks like confirmation that remote access is possible for Fujitsu support personnel.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree with that?
I do.
And if we scroll up, there's an email. Thank you. It's that email at the top. So if we could scroll slightly further up. An email again from Dave King to Julie George, and he says as follows: there is no remote access to the terminals in branches. The only access channel is through the support network for software updates, etc. There is nothing stored on the terminal. All transactions are committed at the data center. It is not possible to instantiate a remote desktop session on a terminal and undertake transactions as if it were being done at that terminal. So that seems to be confirmation that you won't see, for example, a cursor moving or anything along those lines. Do you understand that?
I think so, yeah.
And then if we scroll up on that page, we can see that Leslie Sewell forwards that to you on the 30th of January. He says, she says, Mark, please see that below. And then if we scroll up, please, we see your response as follows. You say, hi, I'm still really confused about this. Dave says below, there is no remote access through the terminals in branches. The only access channel is through the support network for software updates. There is nothing stored on the terminal. All transactions are committed to at the data center. It is not possible to instantiate a remote desktop session on a terminal and undertake transactions as if it were being done at that terminal. This seems to conflict with our lines where it says it is possible to add to transactions to make a correction. We need, obviously, to be absolutely certain on all this. Help. And if we scroll above, we have a response from Julie George that says, as I understand it, Kevin Lenahan is pulling this all together for Melanie to ensure there is only one version and one comms route. Could we please turn to poll 00151050? And it's third page, please. Thank you. The third page is an email from Mark Underwood at 3:50 p.m. And he is emailing is that James Davidson and Kevin Lenahan. And he says, hi, Kevin, my proposed answer to the first question below, it can be sent in its entirety to Mel, and she can pick and choose, though this will need to be signed off by James as accurate. And then if we scroll down, in terms of question 1, this question often phrased by applicants and Second Sight is, can the Post Office remotely access Horizon? Phrasing the question in this way does not address the issue that is of concern to Second Sight. This seems to be a stock answer that was prepared for the Second Sight report. Is that correct?
I think that's correct. That looks correct from looking at this.
Issue that is of concern to Second Sight and applicants. It refers generically to Horizon, but more particularly is about the transaction data recorded by Horizon. Also, the word access means the ability to read transaction data without editing it. Post Office / Fujitsu has always been able to access transaction data. However, it's the alleged capacity of Post Office / Fujitsu to edit transaction data that appears to be of concern. Finally, it has always been known that Post Office can post additional correcting transactions to a branch's accounts, but only in ways that are visible to sub-postmasters. It is the potential for any hidden method of editing data that is of concern. And another question, can Post Office or Fujitsu edit transaction data without the knowledge of a sub-postmaster? Post Office confirms that neither it nor Fujitsu can edit transaction data without the knowledge of a sub-postmaster. There is no functionality in Horizon for either branch, Post Office, or Fujitsu to edit, manipulate, or remove a transaction once it has been recorded in a branch's accounts. So it looks as though that actually predates the other information that we've seen, because that is, as we discussed, a response to applicants and Second Sight. If we stick with this email chain and go to page 1, please. If we scroll down, there's another response from James Davidson, who's actually from, I think, from Fujitsu, the Post Office account. And he says as follows: I've just seen this as was working in another mail to you, which I've posted below. And he posts the original draft that he was going to send. Having looked again at the request from Paula, it appears that the fundamentals around this question, remote access, are not understood. I suggest that Paula is briefed along the lines of the following. No transaction data is held locally at any branch. 2, sub-postmasters directly manage user access and password setting locally. 3, once a transaction has been completed, there is no functionality by design for transactions to be edited or amended. Each transaction is given a unique number and wrapped in a digital encryption seal to protect its integrity. All transactions are then posted to a secure and segregated audit server. 4, on approval, there is the functionality to add additional transactions which will be visible and have a unique identifier in the audit trail. This is extremely rare and only been used once since go live of the system in 2010, March 2010. Support staff have the ability to review event logs and monitor in real time the availability of the system infrastructure as part of the standard management process. Overall system access is tightly controlled via industry standard, role-based access protocols, and assured independently, etc. Could we please turn to poll 001511049? That email is then forwarded to you by Leslie Sewell at 5:28 p.m. on the 30th of January. Can you see, if we scroll down, we can see that email. Do you agree with that?
Sorry, yes.
Could we please turn to poll 000299812? So this is an email from Melanie Caulfield just over an hour after confirmation had been provided that it was possible. If we scroll down, you can see we're there 6:17. Thanks again to everyone. This all provides the reassurance needed for Paula, in my view, regarding any questions that come up on this. If we get more queries on any aspect, I will let you know. By the end of January 2015, was it all a little bit muddled at the Post Office with regards to remote access?
I don't think so.
And what do you think the position was?
That remote access was potentially possible in certain circumstances.
Could we please turn to poll 000299849? This is Second Sight's Part 2 report of the 9th of April 2015. Could we please turn to page 30? So we were looking at January 2015 before. We're now in April 2015. Halfway down the page, this is a section on transactions not entered by the sub-postmaster or their staff. 14.4 says that one applicant to the scheme had given evidence relating to the facility in the Bracknell office. They say at 14.5, our review of those files have been inconclusive, possibly due to just 1 month of data being provided rather than the 12 months requested. We believe that it's essential to examine contemporaneous documents from the relevant time in order to form a reliable, evidence-based conclusion on this important aspect. Several applicants have stated that they believe or suspect that their branch terminals have been or can be accessed remotely, or that their branch data can be amended without their knowledge or approval. Post Office have denied that it is possible to amend branch data remotely. If we scroll down, please, to 14.10. They say, in our interim report, we referred to a software bug in Horizon that had impacted a small number of branches. We have recently discovered 2 further documents that describe in more detail how the Post Office handled this issue. In both of these documents, a process is described that involves directly altering branch data. The fix for this error reported in the document named correcting accounts for loss discrepancies created by a senior engineer at Fujitsu in September 2010. And it says the data can be corrected by adjusting the appropriate opening figures and BTS data that relates to the current TP. This will result in the discrepancy needing to be processed when rolling over into the next trading period. I propose that if we are to do this, then we take a copy of the data for one branch and check out the proposed changes on a test system, and then roll over the branch on the test system to ensure that the discrepancy is handled correctly before we attempt to correct live data. And then it says at 14.11, this document refers to correcting live data, a procedure that Post Office has denied was possible. Of potential significance is the fact that this was not just an internal document made available to a small number of Fujitsu employees, as the copy we were provided with was printed out by the head of Post Office legal prosecution team in October 2010. So you've said that looking at those earlier emails, it was sufficiently clear to the Post Office that it was possible in certain circumstances to access the data remotely. It seems as though on the 9th of April 2015, it was certainly unclear to Second Sight, and they didn't feel that they had received enough information from the Post Office. Do you agree with that?
I think this is Second Sight's Part 2 report, I think I'm right in saying.
Yes.
And I think I'm also right in saying that Post Office, that we, shortly after this report, did a full response to the Second Sight Part 2 report, which maybe you're going to take me to. We're obviously in some very deep technical territory here. I'd really be keen to see what the Post Office's response had been in its response to this particular part of the Second Sight report.
But the response that you gave me before was quite simple, quite straightforward, quite clear to understand that it was possible in certain circumstances. We have here a question mark being raised by Second Sight, and I want to take you now to a response that you gave to the Panorama programme in the same year, in June 2015. Can we please look at poll 003175548? It's page 10, please. Sorry, if we could start at the bottom of page 9. So we have an email here from you, 16th of June 2015, so 2 months after that Second Sight report. Matthew Bardo and Connor Spackman, were they, who were they?
They were Panorama researchers, reporters.
Many thanks for your email of late Friday afternoon and for further detail it provides in terms of the ground you appear to wish to cover in your programme, and for Matt's follow-up. My apologies for getting back to you slightly later than I had planned. As you know, I remain puzzled and concerned that the BBC did not see fit to raise the majority of these issues and the very serious allegations within them with us when we met your colleagues at our offices last Tuesday. You then go on to address a number of matters. If we could scroll down and on to page 11. As we've made clear in the lengthy session we had with your colleagues last Tuesday, we're not prepared to engage in a public debate about individual cases. And then if we scroll down, it says, it follows that I will not be addressing each and every point raised in your email. However, I'm happy to respond more thematically as follows. You address issues such as prosecutions. If we scroll down, you address Horizon. And it's here that over the page that I'd like to take you to. You say as follows: Post Office cannot edit, amend, or otherwise alter branch data remotely. It can add a transaction to a branch account that is naturally subject to rigorous authorization protocols and carries a unique identifier code, rendering it immediately distinguishable from any other transaction. Were these your words?
This email would have been, obviously it's my words, it's my email. We would have put it together as a team and with IT as well.
The words used there are Post Office cannot edit, amend, or otherwise alter branch data. Were those words chosen carefully?
All words were chosen carefully.
Were they chosen intentionally because you knew that Fujitsu could edit, amend, or otherwise alter?
No.
How can you be so confident in that?
Because I know that there may be errors in this email, but I know that I never set out to intentionally mislead or at any point in my career at Post Office, or indeed any point in my career ever. So that's why I can be confident. Now, if there's a mistake in this email, I can only apologise for it.
Responding to Panorama, after the Second Site's Part 2 report, when they had raised concerns about it, wouldn't you want to be 100% sure that every single word on remote access was very carefully used?
I would, yeah.
And do you think that there was a failing here?
I'd like to see the statement that we issued to Panorama in advance of the programme. This is not that. This is an email to the researchers. I'd be keen to see what we said in that statement. I hope that we were absolutely correct in what we said in that statement, but we certainly didn't intend to mislead if we did.
I want to now return to 2016. Could we please look at poll 00029994, please? And we're still on the topic of remote access. At the bottom email, we can see 21st of July 2016 for Mr. Parsons. He says, please find attached a proposed wording on the remote access issue for discussion on our call at 6 p.m. today. Do you recall being involved in the issue of the wording of remote access for the group litigation?
I do.
If we scroll up, please. Rob Houghton has reworded the statement, and he says, it reads, I'll read to you the final sentence. It says, we believe, given the above methods open to the Post Office to deal with errors in a branch accounts, the use of this access to amend a branch's accounts would be rare. However, Post Office is making inquiries as to whether it has ever happened. And your response is at the top of the email. Assuming Rob's additions are underlined elements, I'm not keen on the final sentence. So it looks as though you weren't keen on providing the claimants in the litigation with a sentence that, if we scroll down, read as is highlighted there. Do you recall not being keen on that final sentence?
I don't recall that, no. I don't recall that. I think reading the sentence, it just looks a bit unclear. I think I'd want it to be much clearer, but I don't recall.
You weren't a lawyer.
No.
Was it unusual for the Communications and Corporate Affairs Director to be commenting so carefully on wording that was going to be used in either legal correspondence or legal pleading?
I don't think it was inappropriate.
Do you think that you were qualified in respect of remote access to provide such opinions?
Not in the technical sense, no, absolutely not.
Do you think you had carried out enough investigations into the matters that, as we saw in that earlier email, you were slightly confused by?
I wish I'd carried out more. I wish I'd asked more questions about remote access. I wish I'd got more into the detail of it.
Do you think you should have got more into it when confronted by Panorama?
As I say, I think I've just answered the question.
Could we please turn to poll 00029998? If we scroll down, please, there's still discussion about draft forms of words, and you say as follows: would it help to include whether this particular form of access in final sentence, which emphasises that we've never actually been asked about super users, but are going over and beyond to establish the position? If we scroll up above, we can see the form of words that you are commenting on. It's an email from Andrew Parsons. He says, Mark, I'm happy with your suggestion, and we can see it there. So we have database and server access and edit permissions is provided within strict controls to a small controlled number of specialist Fujitsu personnel. Use of these permissions is logged but rare. Inquiries are continuing as to whether this particular form of access could be used to affect a branch's accounts, and if so, whether this has happened. Is it odd that you, the Communications Director, was having such a direct role in formulating words that were going to be used in litigation relating to remote access?
I don't think it was odd, and I think if anyone had any concerns, they would have been raised with me, but no, I don't think it was odd.
If we scroll down on that page, you say, in respect of the issue of a super user, emphasises that we've never actually been asked about super users, but are going over and beyond. I mean, is that right? Wasn't super user something that was very much an issue for a number of years?
I'm afraid I don't recall.
Could we please turn to poll 00030002? This is the various email threads are 2 email threads. Could we please start at page 3 of this thread? If we scroll down, there's an email from Andrew Parsons to yourself. If we scroll down, sorry. He says, in response to your question in the other email thread about seeing everything we've said about remote access, we don't have a central log of everything Post Office has said on remote access. However, the language used in the email reference below, attached again, is reflective of the language used by the Post Office towards the end of the scheme. If we scroll up, please, we have an email from yourself at the top. And you say, I'm stuck with a live issue at present. My uneasiness on this issue is why we can't give a firmer position on the super user point before we reply. I suspect I know the answer, but the current wording leaves us vulnerable, and we would need to look at what we have said publicly before we commit the position. What did you mean by I suspect I know the answer?
I don't know. I mean, I think this email is about me wanting to make sure that we're absolutely firm in telling the truth.
I mean, it looks as though you are concerned that the answer might be bad for the Post Office.
No, I don't think so.
If we scroll up, please. We have there an email from Thomas Moran to Mark Underwood. You're copied in. He says, Mark, Andy, please can you set out the timeline for approving this text, e.g. Deloitte, Fujitsu, if this is necessary. Again, that's another reference there to Deloitte. If we look at the top, a response from Andrew Parsons. He says, I think we've agreed the wording on the Post Office side. Tony has already signed off. I've sent the wording to both Fujitsu and Deloitte and asked for comments by close of business tomorrow. If we scroll up, please, onto the first page, Mark Underwood says, I've been through the scheme chronology and reviewed the statements made by the Post Office regarding remote access. Please find attached what I feel are the key statements made publicly. Jane McLeod then responds, and she says, thanks, Mark, this is helpful-ish. To all on the email chain, please do not forward this email to anyone else, as it is critical that we maintain privilege around it. Given the statements that Mark has collated, can we please reference the advice from Fujitsu that we have relied on in making these statements? For example, did we show Fujitsu the drafts of these before making them, etc.? As clearly there is a gap between these and what we now understand may be the case. Andy, once this is available, would you please consider whether this affects the legal risk and approach? Mark D. and others, we need to consider the positioning around the current wording in light of these statements. Did that raise any concerns with you?
I'm sure it did. I don't recall. I mean, obviously I've seen the email since it was disclosed. But I think it underlined to me that we were seeking to make sure that we were getting the right position, the correct position, before the court. And that if we'd made mistakes, errors in the past, we would correct them, because that was the intention.
Could we scroll up, please? What did you understand by that first sentence? To all on the email chain, please do not forward this email to anyone else, as it is critical that we maintain privilege around it. Was there a concern on Jane McLeod's perspective that this could be bad for Post Office in the litigation?
I think you'd have to ask Jane McLeod that.
We have here an email from yourself saying, I'm away as of tonight, so perhaps we should speak this afternoon. Do you recall speaking to Jane McLeod about it?
I mean, I spoke to Jane almost every day, so I don't recall that particular conversation.
And what do you recall of her concerns, if any, in relation to this issue?
Like everyone I worked with at the Post Office, she was very, very determined that we told the truth, that we were accurate in what we told, certainly what we told to the courts and what we told to the media.
Could we please look at poll 002459878? We're now in November of 2016. Bottom email is an email from Andrew Parsons. I don't think you're copied in at that stage. It reads as follows. It says, the key substantive area is section 9 on remote access. In particular, Rob, I'll be grateful if you could review this section. Following feedback from Deloitte, we cannot definitively say that Post Office, as distinct from Fujitsu, never had the ability to change Horizon data because Deloitte and the current staff at Fujitsu just don't have enough knowledge of old Horizon to confirm this. So it looks as though, in fact, even that earlier statement that was given to Panorama was now proving to not be correct. Do you agree with that?
That would seem to be the case. They're saying that we cannot definitively say that Post Office never had the ability to change Horizon data. Yeah.
This was a point made in an early draft, but it has now been removed. We have, I hope, now found formulation of words that avoids having to overly throw Fujitsu to the wolves and avoids any risk of waiving privilege in any documents, but still gives us a fair story to tell. We have also toned down the admissions of making incorrect statements, though they are still there. I hope this might make it easier to get this letter cleared through the group executive and Fujitsu. Do you recall issues or concerns being raised at group executive level regarding the wording that would go to the claimants in the group litigation? on the issue of remote access?
I recall a deep sense of frustration at this point that, again, it appeared that we'd made misleading statements based on what we'd been told at the time, and I do remember the frustration and anger that created. Yes.
If we scroll up to the first page, Thomas Moran then emails the group. And he says, my overall conclusion is that it could very well have serious implications on the proceedings, and we absolutely have to make sure we're briefing and securing the support of the right people internally before issuing. As I'm the lucky man with the responsibility for this, as the steering group chair, you were still on the steering group at this point?
Yes.
Yes. I must ask that we get this properly reviewed by Mark Davis and also Angela, who I don't think are on the list. In particular, we need a full assessment and media plan based on the worst case consequences in place before sending. Do you think that it was important to get a media plan in place before sending to the claimants in the litigation an admission that there had been incorrect statements made in respect of remote access?
I think it would always be right, and Tom was right, I think, to raise that as a factor. It's certainly not the determining factor, and it's not the most important factor, but there would undoubtedly have been media implications from this situation. So it's understandable. I think any organisation in a similar place would have come up with a media plan to address it.
Could we please look at poll 00024991? This is the attached document that's being circulated and addresses remote access. If we look over the page at 1.5 and 1.6, we can see what they're now saying. They say at 1.5, Post Office may have made some incorrect statements, but refutes any suggestion that it ever did so deliberately or did so to mislead or deceive. And the comment is, not sure about the sentence. I don't believe you've answered inappropriately in the past. I don't think that's right, is it?
I don't know who's making that comment in the brackets.
That doesn't seem right, does it?
Sorry?
It doesn't seem right that you hadn't answered inappropriately in the past. I mean, the Post Office had answered inappropriately in the past, hadn't it?
Well, answered. I mean, people have made delivered answers based on what they understood to be the case at the time, and as a result, those statements were incorrect.
So those words in brackets, do you disagree with them?
I don't know where they've come from.
Do you disagree with them?
Inappropriate? I mean, I think I do disagree with them. I mean, the next sentence: the Post Office personnel responsible for these statements believe the statements when they were made, and that's the position.
What was said reflected what they understood to be the position to be after making relevant inquiries. Unfortunately, they did not pick up on the issue of Fujitsu administrator access at Post Office would have liked. This is a matter of great regret, but it does not mean that Post Office exhibited willful blindness or reckless indifference to the truth of those statements. And in brackets, somebody's put, I think this is too much. Can we not just say the Post Office responded appropriately to the question of whether transactions could be altered by Post Office without the postmaster's knowledge? The answer to this question is consistently the same: it is not possible. Expanding on this, it is possible for Fujitsu to access the system through administrator access, which they have confirmed. This is not unusual and is in common with any other organization. You would need to discuss with them their ability to modify transactions. Our expert assessment would say this is extremely difficult, but theoretically possible. Was there a certain defensiveness amongst your steering group as to making full admissions on remote access?
I don't think so, no. I don't think there was defensiveness. I think there was frustration, but not defensiveness, no.
Could we please turn to poll 000249882? And page 2, please. At the bottom of page 2, it's almost midnight on the 28th of November. Jane McLeod is emailing Paula and Al Cameron. Following discussions with our QC and Bond Dickinson this afternoon, the following is the recommended language to be included in the response to Freeths in the wider section on remote access. At each stage, Post Office ascertained the position to respond to the question it believed it was being asked. With the benefit of hindsight, some of Post Office's statements might have been incorrect in light of what has since now been identified in relation to Fujitsu's administrator access rights. But Post Office refutes any suggestion that it made false statements, etc. It says at the bottom, the challenge has been to balance the risk of adverse publicity ahead of the court process, Post Office's concern, with the need to be open and transparent with the court in admitting that certain of the information we provided previously on this issue could be construed as wrong. Scrolling down, it says, given Mark D had other commitments today, I'm taking him through this wording early tomorrow. Did you see that as the problem facing the Post Office? If we scroll up slightly, the risk of adverse publicity versus the need to be open and transparent with the court.
No, I don't agree with that. I think the most important thing was ensuring that we were open and transparent with the court.
If we could scroll up, please. There's then a conversation. I think you then see it. I think you're then chased for it. And then at the very top, page 1, you say, apologies you read through and you are content. One more document before we have our break, and that's poll 001633124. This is earlier in the day. Could we please look at the bottom email from Jane McLeod? That's the email that we just saw. And if we scroll up, we have a response from Melanie Caulfield to you. And she says as follows, very slightly suggested tweaks as discussed, highlighted attached. I think the context and language around the difficult parts are very good, though, in portraying the ridiculousness of the claims about remote access. So I don't think we should worry too much. We're now in November 2016, and Melanie Caulfield is again emailing you very frankly with her views that the claims about remote access are ridiculous. Was that a view that was shared in your team at that time?
No, I wouldn't use the words that she's used.
How is it that far down the line, after everything we've seen, after confirmation in emails from Fujitsu, after various discussions about forms of words, lack of clarity about remote access, that the communications team, the team that you led, is still describing those remote access claims as ridiculous?
I think it's a question that you would have to ask Melanie.
Well, you were her boss, effectively, weren't you?
I didn't regard them.
She's having no difficulty in expressing that view to you. We've read email after email about conspiracies and the press being unfair. Did you still think in November 2016 that the claims about remote access were ridiculous?
Not ridiculous. I found it difficult to put a claim about remote access, which I think we had ascertained had been used once, against the weight of the accusations that were being made against the Post Office.
You yourself had found it very difficult to even understand the answer at one stage about remote access. Paragraph 88 of your witness statement page 32, you've described, I think, the press team as a high-performing and high-quality team. Looking at this email and looking at a similar email from Melanie Caulfield in relation to these issues, do you still maintain that they were a high-performing and quality team?
I do.
Thank you, sir. That is a convenient moment to take our mid-afternoon break.
All right. Until when?
Could we come back at 37 minutes past, if possible? We have quite a bit to get through still.
Okay, fine.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. I'm going to move on now to a number of different topics, starting with action at the board level. We've heard a lot of evidence about Simon Clarke's advice on the reliability of Gareth Jenkins. That was dated the 15th of July 2013. When did you first know about that advice?
I couldn't recall with any certainty.
Do you recall it ever being mentioned at board level?
Almost certainly, yes. Whether I was at the board meetings when it was referred to, I couldn't be certain.
Almost certainly, yes. You're assuming?
That it was referred to at
Yes.
board level. It would have undoubtedly been referred to at board level, yeah. I didn't attend the board every excuse me, I didn't attend every board meeting.
Why are you so sure that it was referred to at board level?
Because it was an important piece of the picture.
Simon Clarke's advice on the shredding of documents or destruction of documents, that was dated the 2nd of August 2013. Can you assist us with when you first knew about that?
I'm sorry, I can't help on that.
Brian Altman's general review, which concluded that Gareth Jenkins was tainted as a witness, that was dated the 15th of October 2013. Do you recall seeing that at all?
I recall hearing about it, yes.
And would that have been around the 15th of October 2013?
It would have been around then, yeah.
And when you say hearing about it, is that about the review or about concerns relating to Gareth Jenkins?
About the concerns.
Can we please turn to some board minutes? That's poll 000215525, 21st of May 2014. We have you named further down as being in attendance for item 1470. Could we please turn to page 6? 1470 is annual report and accounts. So you joined the meeting at that point, and it said the board received the annual report and financial statements. And then can we please look at F? The board discussed the inclusion of Sparrow in the report and agreed that it should be excluded. However, the business agreed that it would be appropriate to include a paragraph in the CEO overview to explain the size of the enterprise risk and the major transformation programs being undertaken, referring back to the risks already highlighted in the CFO report. Can you recall the decision not to include Sparrow in the annual report?
I think excuse me. I think I referred to this in my statement. I don't recall the conversation. I was present at the board for that section because my team and I had responsibility for producing the annual report. I don't recall the conversation. I'm sorry.
Do you recall there being a secrecy regarding the Sparrow project?
Not at all. No.
Moving on to external PR firms. You've said at paragraph 38 that external firms were used as a second pair of eyes. Can you assist us in who from the Post Office was external firms like Portland or Brunswick?
That would be me, usually. It would depend to some extent on the nature of the business that we were talking to that firm about. So we might have a product PR launch, in which case it might be the financial services director or the commercial director might take the lead responsibility, or potentially the marketing director as well. Obviously used external firms a lot, so it varied, but I would certainly be involved in most of those cases.
Could we turn to poll 001177079, page 2, bottom half of the page. The mediation scheme, so this is an email from yourself to, is that members of your team and some others, Patrick Buck, for example. you say as follows: the mediation scheme was set up in 2013 to give the small number of people with complaints about our system a chance to make their case. We've now investigated every single case put to us. It has taken longer than we would have liked, but we can now say with absolute confidence that there are no systemic issues with the Horizon system or associated process. And then if we look above, Melanie Caulfield responds, looks good. We always said we're confident with the system, though, so should we say with even more confidence that Horizon works as it should? Patrick Bock responds, I think we do need to be careful of absolute. If we tie it to these cases, e.g. absolute confidence that no systemic issues with Horizon causing the problems complained of, then I think it's safer. And if we please scroll up, and you say, okay, increase, then can Jane or Mel please send me a note of how Brunswick pitched this opener yesterday? And it says as follows, from Jane Hill. She says, Brunswick pitched this as follows. Post Office serving communities across the UK, 11,500 postmasters, etc. We've spent £5 million investigating concerns. Because we need to protect our brand and to ensure we have 100% confidence in the system that underpins our business, initial second site investigation found no evidence of a problem with Horizon. We've now investigated every case. 50 cases have been mediated or have been passed to mediation. What kind of information would you have passed to Brunswick for them to have formulated that pitch?
I can't really recall, and I can't really recall what the purpose of this pitch was around. I imagine we would have given them the second site interim report, the part 2 report, probably the select committee briefing that we did for Paula Vennells. When is this? 30th of January 2015. Those kinds of documents.
I mean, initial second site investigation found no evidence of a problem with Horizon. That's not right, is it?
No, it's a shorthand, yeah.
Yes. If we scroll up from yourself to Jane Hill, you say, thanks. Mike, please blend these into the pitch, drawing out the 3 key messages we need to get across. Was there a danger in involving these external firms that they wouldn't actually have sufficient knowledge about Horizon and the problems with Horizon and would then make strongly worded statements like the one we just saw?
Well, I mean, Brunswick or any other external organisation wouldn't make any statements on our behalf. They would always be working to a brief set by us.
Would they have sufficient knowledge of years of complaints from sub-postmasters and the kinds of information that you at the Post Office were able to access?
No, but they weren't brought in to be experts in the substance. They would be brought in to be an extra pair of eyes to bring a different perspective to the conversations that we were having.
And is there a danger in that? Because they weren't privy to the kinds of information that you were privy to, develop lines, and then it seems, as per this email, those lines may risk being blended in with existing lines.
I'm not sure, though. There's no one from Brunswick on these emails.
Exactly.
So I'm not totally sure, if, in all honesty, what this email chain is for, and I don't fully recall it. I know that obviously we worked with Brunswick. Of course, there's absolutely a danger of an organisation which isn't fully sort of steeped in the issue being brought in. But obviously, the responsibility for ensuring that isn't a danger lies with the in-house team. It would be the case really in the case of any communications directorate bringing in external advice and support, that you obviously manage that external advice and support appropriately. And
would that be you?
It would.
Could we please turn to poll 001112228? This is later, we're now in 2018, 12th of October 2018. And it's from Portland Communications. With Portland Communications, they were instructed in respect of the litigation, were they?
Well, I think this is them setting out their proposal of what they would potentially do to support us, I think, indicative programme of communications. Yeah.
This short note sets out an indicative programme of communications and public affairs supporting the forthcoming Horizon Group litigation, based on briefings, following briefings with yourself, Melanie, and the Post Office leadership team. If we scroll down, based on this week's briefings, there are 3 main communications pillars we want to work with you to address. The first is an opportunity as well as a threat. Second is coordination between legal strategy and corporate communication. Third is it's vital we proactively engage with political stakeholders. And then at the end, it has a section on cost. While we estimate the work required to support your communications during the first trial in November 2018, the work around the judgment and second trial is less predictable and will depend on the coverage and interest we see in the next couple of months. As such, we propose splitting the project in 2 phases. The first phase will cover the initial 8 weeks of activity, including the preparation and first trial. We can deliver phase 1 of this work at a cost of £35,000 per calendar month for 2 months. The price reflects the senior time dedicated to the account, etc. For phase 2, we review the reaction to the first trial in December and determine what level of support is required. Do you think that it was money well spent? Do you think that it was appropriate for an external communications to be supporting your communications during the litigation?
I think it's entirely appropriate.
Could we turn to poll 001634442? We're now in January 2019. Jane Hill forwards you an email, and the email says as follows, if we scroll down. We propose to end our relationship with Portland at the end of January and commence procurement for PA agency immediately thereafter. Reasons to end our relationship with Portland: £35,000 a month, very expensive for questionable value. The next stage of the GLO will require greater internal communications element. Portland have no experience with this. In the run-up to the Horizon trial, less background knowledge and a fresh perspective would be a benefit, and any good agency would be able to add value. Are you able to assist us with why less background knowledge might be a benefit?
I think always when you're bringing in external support in the communications environment, actually knowing less about the subject is sometimes a benefit, because it can bring a fresh, as Jane says there, bring a fresh perspective. The internal comms element is really important in this context, because clearly here we are in 2019, and I think we're about to get the common issues judgment, and internal comms was absolutely critical in that context, particularly with a very complex franchise sub-postmaster environment. And Portland, I think by their own admission, would say that internal comms isn't their speciality at all. So,
isn't there a risk, though, that messages are being developed, not just here but over the years, by people who don't have the requisite knowledge and requisite background?
No, I don't think that's a risk, because the bedrock of the team remained in place. The in-house team controls the position. It's the organisations like Portland and others, Brunswick we've talked about, are brought in to assist and support, not to direct.
Could we please move on to a different subject, and that's the relationship with the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters. At paragraph 25 of your statement, you say you engaged with the communications team at the NFSP. Can you assist us with what their general view was regarding the Horizon system?
I think the Federation's general view was that they were satisfied that Horizon worked as it should, that had there been systemic and very major problems with the system, their members would have been very vocal about them.
Could we please turn to poll 00174423? We've heard a number of communications from the Post Office. Do you think they affected the NFSP's position?
Sorry, could you repeat that? Apologies.
We've seen today a number of comms, press releases, statements from the Post Office. Do you think that they affected the NFSP's position, their stance on Horizon, or influenced their stance on Horizon?
I don't think so. My experience of the Federation was when George Thompson was their chief executive. He wasn't somebody who could be easily persuaded of a position, and there was plenty of times when they were extremely critical of the Post Office and its actions on other subjects.
Could we please look at poll 00174423? And it's the bottom of that email, please. David McConnell emails you. It says, "Hi, Mark. It's about the Panorama programme in 2015. He said, we've issued the statement below to members. We remain firm on Horizon. You'll appreciate, too, that we need to maintain the critical friend stance." And if we scroll down, they say, for example, put simply, the NFSP has not received calls from sub-postmasters querying Horizon and alleging systematic failings. If there were a widespread problem, our sub-postmasters would have made us aware of it. As a result, we have no choice but to conclude that Horizon is fundamentally a safe and sound system. And if we go to page 1, please. Paula Venables responds to you, a very helpful, if politically positioned letter. George could never be accused of being in anyone's pocket. Great mail to open tonight compared to some from last night. Was the Post Office's relationship with the NFSP too close?
No, I don't think so.
Could we please look at poll 00321147? Bottom of the page, please. You email Patrick Burke and Roderick Williams, and you say as follows. It's about Sparrow, and you say separately, shareholder executive met NFSP, who raised with them and worried them prosecution's approach. NFSP viewers, sub-postmasters, are now widely blaming losses on Horizon, knowing that there will likely be no prosecutions. They also cite a case where a member of staff was accused of theft, blaming Horizon, and we are now pursuing the sub-postmaster for the money, despite clear evidence of the staff being to blame. Obviously, I don't know any more details. Is this a conversation? This is a conversation you had with Richard C. Who's that? Richard Callard.
That's Richard Callard, yeah, who was the who led the shareholder executive at the time of this email.
Did you have any conversation with the NFSP along these lines?
I don't recall doing so. I spoke to their communications team quite regularly. I spoke to George Thompson, who was their chief executive, occasionally, but the Post Office had a specific team responsible for engaging with NFSP who would have done most of those liaisons. And
is that view that's set out there consistent or inconsistent with your understanding of their position at the time?
Well, broadly so, that they believed that Horizon was fundamentally sound.
Could we please turn to poll 00357139? This is May 2016 now. Nick Beale, Head of Agents, Development and Remuneration, emails Mike Granville and yourself, and he says, "Hi both. It was noisy first thing when the issue arose, but I had very few comments through the course of the day. Senior NFSP have been relatively okay. Can't promise there won't be a reaction from the floor, but I'm not getting the sense that they are looking to make a big deal of this. George has been consistent on Horizon, and I'm getting no indication this is changing. He was very robust at a regional meeting I was at, where a question was asked about the class action." Why is Nick Beale sending this message? Is he a route through which you heard the opinions of sub-postmasters or the NFSP?
Nick had responsibility for the relationship with the NFSP. He was the engagement point, if you like, between the business and the NFSP. I can't be certain, but I think this is an email sent during the NFSP's annual conference, I'm assuming, or maybe from a regional meeting. Judging by the text, can't promise there won't be a reaction from the floor. He was the conduit, I suppose, for NFSP views.
I'm going to move on to the relationship with SHEX and UKGI. Paragraph 20, could we turn up paragraph 21 of your witness statement? It's WITN 09860100. It's page 7. You see, I worked very closely with shareholder executive and UKGI colleagues throughout the period covered by my statement. They understandably took a very close interest in communications and stakeholder issues. I had regular meetings with colleagues from SHEX and UKGI. Relationships were strong and collegiate. There was certainly concern from some in the Post Office that their involvement in business issues was sometimes too great, and frustration was expressed that this could be time-consuming and resource-intensive. My view was that SHEX and UKGI were understandably keen to ensure they were cited on key issues in order to be able to address ministerial and other concerns, particularly given the acute political interest in a range of political Post Office issues. Meetings with ministers and special advisors were regularly held on a range of issues, with SHEX and UKGI always involved. Did you believe that there were appropriate boundaries between the Post Office and SHEX or UKGI?
Yes, I think so, and I think I've expressed it there that it was understandable that SHEX and subsequently UKGI wanted to have a close involvement, a close understanding of what was happening at Post Office on a day-to-day basis. It did frustrate some of my colleagues for sure, but I think that the very nature of the Post Office as a publicly owned business with a huge amount of political interest in it meant that it was inevitable that colleagues from the shareholder would be closely involved.
Which colleagues did it frustrate?
I don't think there was a specific sense. Actually, Paula Reynolds wasn't frustrated by it. Actually, I think some of my more commercial colleagues felt that we should have a greater degree of distance from government, but I don't think that was right. It was a sort of constant debate.
Could we please look at poll 00258672? It's an email of the 30th of October 2018. And this relates to attendance at the trial. Page 2, please. Tom Aldred from UKGI says that to Patrick Book, we have previously discussed whether UKGI would attend the trial. I've discussed with our legal team and they believe there's real merit in attending to get a feel for how each side is presenting their case, what the key issues are between them, and sometimes what way the judge might be leaning. If we scroll up, please, Patrick Burke says, I think this is poor judgment, to say the least. Could you advise whether you agree and that we should remonstrate? And you respond, very bad idea. Journalists will ask them who they are and then write stories about the government watching over the Post Office. Were you concerned about it being seen to be, the Post Office to be seen to be too close to government?
I think in this particular case, it was more about a concern that it would benefit neither government nor Post Office for the perception of the government watching over to be found by people.
Could we please we're looking now at relationship with government more broadly. Could we please look at poll 00101341? It's the bottom half of the page, 9th of September 2014. This is the BBC online report about Horizon. Earlier inaccuracies have now been corrected and our clear line included. We will continue to monitor coverage, though it's pleasingly low on BBC schedules. We will update the board in the morning. Biz are aware and in the loop. Joe Swinson has requested a brief for the morning. We are working with Richard Callard on that. So you were working with UKGI to produce a brief for the Minister. Is that
Yes.
something that regularly took place?
Yes, if the Minister requested a brief, then absolutely BIS would, the Business and Industry Department as it was then, Business and Industrial Strategy I think as it was then, department would have contacted us, and they would have probably done it through Richard and his team as the shareholder executive, and we would work with them as appropriate.
Throughout the period that we've been talking about today, so 2013, 2014, 2015, right through the litigation, did you work with UKGI or BAYS on briefings for the Minister?
On a fairly regular basis. I mean, not I wouldn't say it was a sort of monthly occurrence, but if a Minister requested a brief, obviously BIS would come and ask us for support and help, and we would obviously do so.
Still on relationship with government and ministers, could we please look at poll 00101610? I appreciate that these emails, they're broadly in chronological order, but they don't really relate to each other.
Sure.
I'm just asking you a number of questions to cover off a number of issues for the inquiry. This is an email that relates to the meeting with James Arbuthnot in December 2014. If we go down to page 2. The bottom of page 2, please. An email from Alice Perkins. Subject, James Arbuthnot. I initiated a conversation with him on Saturday evening, which was cut off. Despite the opportunity for him to pick it up again yesterday, he chose not to do so. Over the page, please. We moved quickly on to substance. The main thrust of his argument seemed to be that they're big wrongs which we were not acknowledging. In other words, the position he held when he first approached me about this in early 2012. If we please could go to page 1, the bottom of page 1, 1st of December 2014. Gavin Lambert says, thank you, yes, I'll pick up with the team tomorrow. I think Mark has also contacted Oliver Letwin, which needs to be factored into our plan. And then Paula Venel says, yes, in fact, spookily, I just opened my emails to ask Mark where we were on that. In view of James's reaction, it becomes even more important that Oliver Letwin understands that we are also trying to brief him personally. Otherwise, we're just seen to be referring to him in my letter to James Arbuthnot. And if we scroll up, please, you say as follows. You say, hi both, I'm in touch with Oliver and he's agreed to meet me in Westminster. We're just working through diaries. Why Oliver Letwin in particular?
I think he'd raised issues on behalf of a constituent, I think, at the beginning of, well, certainly the beginning of my time at Post Office, and was at one of the meetings, I think, that I'd attended earlier in the time, not before this email, obviously. He was obviously also a senior, I think at the time, a cabinet minister, and we were keen to make sure that we did everything we could to brief him and keep him updated.
Was there an attempt here to effectively divide and conquer, briefing Oliver Letwin, trying to keep him on side because you were falling out with James Arbuthnot?
No. It was much more just simply about making sure that Mr. Letwin, that we briefed him.
Could we turn to poll 00352596, please? I'm just skipping out a few documents because of the time. second email on the page. It is from you to Tom Weschler, and you say, we'll have to answer the question, will you make the Part 2 report, that's the second site report, available to the Select Committee? And I think we should say, yes, we will, and you ask for views. And then if we look above, Patrick Burke says, as to the report, I'm not persuaded we should. They're not entitled to it, and while it may play well on a transparency point, the downstream consequences for endless correspondence about the report's detail and the decision we've taken to be robust, I think outweighs what benefit there may be in doing so. Do you recall this correspondence?
Well, I recall it having seen it, having been disclosed, for
And
sure.
do you recall Patrick Burke taking a different line to yourself?
Oh, yes, I do. Yeah.
And was there tension there for some reason?
Oh, not at all, no.
And perhaps we could look at poll 00352-632. If we could scroll down, please. Melanie Caulfield says, inevitably, Radio 5 Live are asking on the back of our statement, are we saying Mr. Arbuthnot is wrong? Since his standing down, I'm tempted to just go back with yes, but I guess that's unacceptable. Also, it's semantics regarding the word sacking. This is about the sacking or alleged sacking of Second Sight. And she's going to say, Mr. Arbuthnot's question could create very inaccurate impression because we're not suppressing Second Sight's report or destroying documents or something like that. If you scroll up, please, it says, from yourself, I suggest we say we've made the position clear in our report and in our statement. We've published very detailed updates. It's regrettable that a misleading impression is being created. Do you recall being of the opinion that Lord Arbuthnot was creating a misleading impression, as is suggested in this email?
I recall the fact that he'd, I think, been on the radio, and we felt that the words that he'd used had been misleading, yes.
I mean, I think reading this chain, it's about him using the word sacked or Second Sight being sacked. Second Sight were sacked, weren't they?
We ended Second Sight's contract, although they continued to work on all of the mediations. As the mediation scheme came to an end, they were asked to produce reports on all of the cases.
Lord Arbuthnot referring to them as having been sacked, though, that's not a misleading impression.
It's not really, no. I accept that.
Do you think by this time, and we've been over this period, there was a feeling within the Post Office that Second Sight, Lord Arbuthnot, we've seen your emails about conspiracies. Did you think that they were all up against you?
I wouldn't say all up against us, but it certainly felt as though Second Sight by this point were, they were interviewed by Panorama, etc., etc. It certainly didn't feel that they were necessarily acting independently.
Poll 00102-387. This is a memorandum you've prepared for the group executive called Influencing the New Government. And you say as follows, paragraph 2, following the general election, a new government will be formed. This is a critical period in the life of a new parliament where ministers are both at their most powerful and seeking to develop and shape new policy positions. This therefore presents the Post Office with a window of opportunity within which to set out our position and to influence ministers. If we scroll over to page 10, please. It says at the top, these considerations are ranked in order of importance in an assessment by the government's relations steering group. Were you on that group?
Yes.
Yes. They cover the issues on which we will need to influence government proactively to support our position, and those which we will wish to seek to shape government policy into supportive positions, e.g. Sparrow. If we scroll down, we can see there a section on Sparrow. Page 11, please. Yes, thank you. There is likely to be continued, though limited, interest in Sparrow. The recent Select Committee inquiry concluded with a letter to the Secretary of State, and the response was as helpful as we could have hoped for, drawing a line under the particular angle of interest. Any continued interest will be driven by a small group of MPs with constituents in the scheme. The leaking of Second Sight's Part 2 report could act as a catalyst for continued media and political interest. So while we've had some success in removing Sparrow from the spotlight, there is no guarantee that a new minister won't seek to win some early political points by revisiting the issue, or he or she will undoubtedly come under pressure to do so. We should warn about the risks of this course of action. To what extent was it right to seek to remove Horizon issues from the spotlight when that spotlight is being shone by the company's sole shareholder, the government?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Sorry.
To what extent was it right to remove or seek to remove Horizon issues from the spotlight when that very spotlight was being shone by the government, who are Post Office's sole shareholder?
Well, I think as communications team with responsibility for managing reputational risk for the business, it was understandable that I and the team were looking to ways to reduce the way in which this issue, as it was then understood, was in the headlines.
The government, though, is your shareholder. It's not a public statement. It's to somebody who has actually a financial interest in the business. Do you think that it's appropriate to seek to minimise Sparrow issues to a new government?
I think the right thing to do was to explain and to talk to the ministers and to talk to government about the situation, and to do so in line with the government, with the business's overall strategy.
So I think those are all of the questions that I have. There are a number of topics that I've struck through, and I'm sure that people will...
Mr. Blake, I've run out of steam, so I'm calling it a halt, full stop,
yes.
so to speak.
So there are just 3 minutes for Mr. Maloney and 5 minutes
No,
for Mr. Henry.
they're never 3 or 5 minutes with the best will in the world. And putting it bluntly, if they are only 3 minutes and 5 minutes, we can probably do without them. So, as I say, I think we've heard enough from Mr. Davies. So thank you, Mr. Davies, for making your witness statement and for attending to answer many questions today. I'm grateful to you.
Thank you, sir.
And we'll adjourn until tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.